Now we'll move to leaders' questions under Standing Order 36, and I call Deputy Mayor Lou MacDonald.
I've lost count of the number of times that I've asked you to ban rent increases. Each time you have said no. Despite rent soaring to unaffordable levels, you won't budge. And now, because of your refusal to act, runaway rents have hit an all-time high. The recent report from the Residential Tenancy Board shows massive rent hikes over the last 12 months. New rents have increased by almost 12% in the last year. It's the highest annual rent hike since the RTB began recording these figures 15 years ago. €1,600 per month, that's the average new rent being charged across the state. €2,105 per month, that's what's being charged on average here in Dublin. This Taoiseach is off-the-wall stuff. It's not sustainable for any worker, for any family, for any young person. Runaway rents have become almost normalised on the watch of your government, but there's nothing normal about hard-pressed renters being fleeced right, left and centre. Nothing normal about levels of rent that just keep going up and up and up. How are renters to build a good life, Taoiseach, as they fork out these extortionate rents? Most don't stand a chance of getting a mortgage deposit together. Not a hope. Every month is another hammer blow to renters who want to own their own home. They do all of the right things. They work hard, they make cutbacks, they scrimp and they save. But with each hike, the dream of home ownership is pushed even farther away. Is it any wonder that home ownership has collapsed under your government for a generation? And no wonder that they pack their bags for Australia and Canada. They're getting out of Dodge. Older renters then, approaching pension age, are also caught up in this nightmare. They worry that their pension won't cover their rent. What an awful feeling it must be for someone who's worked hard all of their life, only to be left with this terrible uncertainty. Families, workers and young people deserve and need affordable housing and affordable rent. And yet the response of your government has been to set affordable housing targets that are far too low and miss those targets again and again. You tell us that your housing plan is working. That claim simply doesn't stack up in the real world. Housing prices are up, home ownership is down, rents are through the roof, homelessness is at record levels. That's your performance on housing, Taoiseach. And your repeated message to renters is, don't look to us for real help, you're on your own. Well, that's not going to wash anymore, Taoiseach. Renters need meaningful action now. The tax credit you provided is too low. It's being swallowed up by extortionate rent hikes, and without a ban on rent increases, this will keep happening. Ní hagan ein dere le ciasana roier, cahi an rialtas cosca chur ordu ciasa feag 3 bliana, agus ciasana a geara 3 cias umlan na miasa a chur irash I bóci ciasiori. Taoiseach, renters are crying out to government for help that will make a real impact and difference. Sinn Féin brings a motion before the Dáil tonight. It calls on you to do two things for renters. Firstly, to implement an emergency 3-year ban on rent increases, and secondly, to cut rents by putting a full month's rent back into the pockets of every private renter. Will you finally take these actions?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Thanks, Deputy. First of all, we have rent pressure zones in Ireland. We introduced them many years ago, and the vast majority of people renting in Ireland are covered and are protected by those rent pressure zones. And that means seeing increases of between 0 and 4% a year. We've also introduced the rent tax credit, and that's a big help for a lot of people. Next year, it's €750 a year for a single person, €1,500 a year for a couple who are renting together, and that, in many cases, is a month's rent back in renters' pockets. You mentioned some figures that were out in the past couple of days. Those figures show that the average rent paid by somebody in Ireland in existing tenancy is around €1,300 a month, and that's per property, not per renter. Obviously higher in Dublin, lower outside of Dublin and the major cities. And the figures you specifically referred to, Deputy, relate to new tenancies. New tenancies are properties that are being put on the market, that are being rented out for the first time. Where an existing tenancy is rolled over, the rent pressure zone continues to apply. Rent pressure zones don't apply to properties being put on the market for the first time. And the obvious difficulty, what you propose, is that if you impose a rent freeze on a property that is being rented for the first time, it only applies after it's been rented out, and that's the difficulty with what you propose. The problem that we see in imposing rent freezes for 3 years, which is your party policy, is that it would almost certainly reduce new supply. And what we desperately need in Ireland is new supply of homes of all types. Homes for people to purchase, social housing, and also homes for people to rent. So your policy would mean fewer properties available for people to rent. And yes, that might be of benefit to people who are renting already, but it would pull up the ladder on people who need to rent for the first time. For example, young people, for example, students who get their first job, for example, new arrivals to this country, like nurses, for example, coming to work here in our health service, or indeed people coming back from Australia and the UK and places that they may have migrated to. When it comes to home ownership, Deputy, I have some good news for you. We are seeing record numbers of first-time buyers. We haven't seen the numbers of first-time buyers like we've seen recently for 16 years. About 500 first-time mortgages being drawn down every week. About 400 people buying their first home. Haven't seen that in 16 years. And that is happening because of some of the policies that government has put forward. Increasing housing supply, reducing the cost of building new homes by getting rid of development levies or suspending them, which is something you're opposed to. The help to buy, something you're opposed to. Giving people their own taxes back to help towards a deposit when they're buying a new home. And also schemes like First Home. These are all the things that you would take away from people, Deputy, and you need to be honest about that. Sinn Féin is not a party of home ownership. Sinn Féin wants to take away from people all the things that the government has put in place to help people buy a first home.
Home ownership has collapsed on your watch, Taoiseach. That's not just my opinion or my view. I don't say that from a position of bias. That's the fact. That's the fact of the matter. We have runaway rent, we have record levels of homelessness, and we have rents that are crippling people. That's the fact. And the figures that I have quoted to you are from the RTB. They also report, by the way, that existing rents, not new rents, but existing rents were up 5.5% in Dublin and 5% across the state. So this is a bad news story all round. And I am simply asking you to intervene at a time where you have to know how badly people are struggling. You have to know that if you live in the real world at all. Families, workers, young people really struggling to keep a roof over their head. And I'm simply asking you to intervene and do a thing that is eminently sensible. For 3 years, make it the case that there can be no further increase in rents.
Thank you, Deputy.
Just ban rent increases for 3 cents. It's common sense, and it answers directly the experience and situation and hardship that so many families, workers and young people are experiencing now.
Deputy, you say things with such a level of confidence that I say a lot of people actually believe you. But do you actually know the facts? The census says that in 2011, when I was first appointed to government, 1.15 million people owned their own home. In the last census in 2022, 1.2 million people own their own home. So in raw numbers, actually more people own their own home in 2022 than was the case in 2011. And yeah, fair enough, the population has increased. So home ownership in the census in 2022 was 68.9%. In 2011 was 70.4%. Is that really a collapse from 70.8% to 68.9%? And by the way, Deputy, just in case you're not aware, percentages have to add up to 100. So why is there one of the reasons why we've seen a change in numbers? Because the percentage of people benefiting from social housing has gone up from 8.7% in 2011 to 10% in 2022.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
It is true. It's
Please, Deputy Holly.
the actual census, like.
Deputy Holly Kern.
Facts aren't yours, take.
Can we calm down a little bit, please? And if the Mass exodus could be quiet as well. Deputy Holly Kearns, please.
Margaret Ceann Corla. Taoiseach, how much longer is the international community going to sit back and watch an impending genocide in Gaza? How many innocent civilians have to die? How many children have to be butchered? How many hospitals have to be destroyed? How many residential buildings flattened? How many schools decimated? How many farms devastated? How much slaughter and indiscriminate destruction can Western leaders stomach? More than 15,000 people have now been massacred in Gaza, including at least 6,000 children. Will 5,000 more Palestinian lives satisfy Israel's desire to seek revenge? 10,000? 20,000? Or is there any number of Palestinian lives lost that is deemed unacceptable? Taoiseach, nearly 2 months ago, Israel gave more than 1 million people just 24 hours to leave northern Gaza. And then they destroyed everything in the north. Hospitals, schools, apartment buildings, even refuge camps. Now, after a brief 7-day ceasefire, they have resumed their slaughter. Except this time, their focus is in the south, where more than 1 million displaced people were told to seek shelter. The depths of the depravity being unleashed in Gaza is unprecedented in its scale and in its brutality. Having told millions of civilians to flee to the south, Israel has now divided Gaza into a grid system of 600 blocks. Every day it drops flyers in Gaza telling civilians which grids are about to be blown off the face of the earth. However, the information can only be accessed through a QR code or social media posts. Gaza has been reduced to rubble. Its communication systems are in tatters. How many people have smartphones or internet connections to check if they're about to be blown to bits? This level of calculated and premeditated barbarism is disgusting. The fact that many Western leaders are watching this and still refusing to directly criticise Israel is despicable. What will it take for the international community to act? Or are Israel free to unleash whatever hell they like on more than 2 million people? Already, civilians in Gaza have been murdered, mutilated, displaced, starved, and brutalised. They've all been denied all of the protections they are supposed to have under international humanitarian law. Taoiseach, the Irish government's words of condemnation has been stronger than most EU countries. But words are not enough. It is long past time for sanctions to be imposed on Israel. Taoiseach, it's now 3 weeks since you told me you get legal advice on whether Israel is in breach of the human rights clause in the EU-Israel trade agreement. Have you done that? And the next EU Council meeting is next Thursday. Will you be recommending sanctions on Israel at that meeting?
Thank you, Deputy Kearns. Taoiseach.
Thanks, Deputy. I share your horror about what's continuing to unfold in Gaza, and I don't think anyone can find the current situation to be anything more than unbearable, quite frankly, to see thousands of people being killed and thousands of children losing their lives. And while Israel has the right to defend itself, the actions that they've taken, in my view and that of the government, are disproportionate and will ultimately be counterproductive because we know from history that when people are treated in that way, it strengthens their resolve. And I think, as the Americans have said in recent days, Israel might achieve a military victory, but it's very likely to be a strategic defeat in terms of their own long-term security. And I was glad to hear the American authorities using that language and putting across that message. In terms of the questions that you asked, Deputy, in relation to Israel's actions in Gaza and the international community, I don't speak for Israel, and I don't speak for the international community either. I can only speak for the Irish government, and our position is very clear that there should be a new ceasefire. That ceasefire should be an extended one, if not a permanent one, and it should be observed by all sides, not just by Israel, but also by Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the Palestinian militant groups that are also committing to terrible actions and have done so. We don't have the legal advice back yet, Deputy. I have asked for that, but I don't have it back yet. I hope to have it back soon. And just in relation to sanctions, I can only say what I've said before. Sanctions are only effective when they're done on a multilateral basis. I don't believe it would be the right thing for Ireland to engage in imposing unilateral sanctions. There would be a response. There would almost certainly be retaliation, not just Israel, perhaps from others. That would create problems for us and disadvantages for our citizens and would not be effective in changing the mind of the Israeli government. And I think you know that as well as I do. Sanctions can only be effective if they're done on a multilateral basis. And we are one of the countries that is listened to at an international basis. Attended COP in Dubai in the last couple of days. I had a chance to speak to a lot of countries from the Arab world, from the global south. They recognise the position that Ireland is taking as one of leadership within the European Union, that we're not applying double standards in the way that some countries are. But if we go out on a limb and take unilateral actions, we'll be listened to less. It might make us feel better, but it won't do any good for the Palestinian people.
Deputy Kearns.
You said from the EU-Israel trade agreement 3 weeks ago. Where's the urgency when a child is dying every 10 minutes in Gaza? People there can't wait any longer. Whole families, generations of people have been wiped off the face of the earth. People don't have enough food and water. They've nowhere to flee from the bombs. Most of the hospitals aren't functional anymore. And we're watching it happen without doing anything meaningful to try and stop them. Absolutely zero pressure is being applied to Israel. Netanyahu has been clear that the killing will continue until they say Hamas has been destroyed. But how will they measure that? We know their intelligence isn't reliable, and we know they engage in lies and misinformation to cover up their human rights abuses. Israel has to face consequences. Ireland must advocate for that at an EU level. So going out on a limb and introducing the EU sanctions, I recognise is something you can do. I'm asking, will you push for that at an EU level at the next meeting on Thursday to try and get that unilateral response like we did with the war in Ukraine, to encourage the rest of the community in Europe to take those strong actions? Because, Taoiseach, I understand your position and I agree with it, but the position of only having words of condemnation is what I can't understand. We can do more to try and save lives, and you're not doing it. We need actions to match those words. Where is the urgency?
Taoiseach, please.
Thanks, Deputy. There's a lot that we're doing as a country on an international stage. And both Taoiseach and I have been very active on this issue. And when I met people from all over the world in Dubai in the last couple of days, from the Arab world and from the global south in particular, they were very appreciative and thankful of the Irish position, the position that we've been taking, which is not one of double standards. And that's something we're going to continue. We've done a lot of work to help our citizens to get out of Gaza. We've done a lot of work to make sure that humanitarian aid could get into Gaza, and we'll continue on that work. But, Deputy, I do take exception to the idea that there's something the Irish government isn't doing that would stop the killing in Gaza. I don't think that's a fair comment, if that's what you meant. You know, it's almost trying to blame the Irish government and the Irish people for the actions of Israel. And, well, if that's not what you're trying to imply, well, then thank you for that clarification.
Thank you very much. Deputy Michael Lowry now on behalf of the regional group.
Across the country were outraged when they learned the inside secrets of RTE's operation. News of bonus payments and sponsorship perks were followed by acrimonious debate. It was clear that if RTE was to survive, decisive action and government help was required. Your government approved 56 million staged bailouts subject to a number of stringent conditions. As these government discussions took place, they were closely observed by the Independent Broadcaster of Ireland, the body that represents all of the 34 countries' independent radio stations. These independent broadcasters provide an essential service to communities across the country. They are the information source for everything that has happened locally, and they keep people updated about important issues and events that are taking place where they live. Local radio is the preferred listening choice in homes across Ireland. They are structured in such a way that they bring local happenings into homes on a daily basis. Local radio is the bedrock of local communities. Despite the vital and irreplaceable role they play, their news service is currently under threat. Local radio now finds itself in a constant battle against unregulated news sources, online and on every social media platform available. Their ability to be first out with local news and updates is being thwarted by unsolicited and often ill-informed and unreliable sources. They have no defence against this activity. They were given a glimmer of light with the recommendations contained in the report of the Commission on the Future of Media. These recommendations include the introduction of a pilot support scheme known as the Local Democracy Reporting Scheme, which it was hoped would provide financial assistance in the coverage of local and European elections. Taoiseach, can you inform the House as to why this will not now happen? This will negatively impact local radio scope to provide detailed, accurate and balanced coverage of the upcoming elections. It will also leave the door open for unregulated keyboard warriors to irresponsibly spread inaccurate and potentially dangerous information. And we have recent evidence and example of how wide-ranging this scope can be. IBI has put forward a request for interim funding of €2.5 million to support their coverage of the 24 elections. To assist in their ability to survive, they are also seeking parity in VAT with the print sector, which had VAT slashed to 0%. In light of the anticipated 30 million media fund allocation, they are seeking to have an allocation of €5 million per annum, specifically for news and current affairs. They are asking for the removal of the broadcasting levy. In essence, they are seeking to be recognised and included in any new model of funding. It is vital that future funding be allocated in an equitable and fair manner. 3.3 million people listen to local radio daily. 1,500 jobs are dependent on its survival. So, Taoiseach, the clock is ticking for local radio, and government would do well to tune into their problems.
Thank you, Deputy Lowry. Taoiseach, please.
Thanks very much, Deputy, for raising this really important issue. And I think at a time of misinformation and disinformation, and at a time when that is so often amplified online, the importance of quality media and the importance of public service broadcasting has never been so valid. And yes, that is RTE and the national media, but it's also local media, both broadcasters, local radio and local newspapers as well, many of which employ a lot of people, and many of which are also struggling financially at the moment. You mentioned the recommendation from the Future of Media Commission to establish a new media fund through which a wider range of outlets and platforms could be supported in the provision of public service content. 6 million is being allocated in the budget, in the appropriations bill, which was approved by Cabinet today, to establish this fund on an administrative basis. And priority is being given to two projects which you mentioned. One is local democracy reporting and the other is courts reporting. So courts reporting will enable local media to cover what's going on in the district court in particular, in their own locality, and the local democracy reporting scheme will be there to cover what goes on, for example, at council meetings and other important local events. So 6 million is allocated for that to be established next year. Minister Martin and Commissioner Naman are developing these schemes, and because there may be an issue around state aid and government subsidies, it does have to be notified to the European Commission. We don't think that's going to be a huge problem, but because it does involve a government subsidy or a government state aid to a private business, that has to be done. But subject to state aid approval, those two new schemes will be in place in 2024. We'll have a budget of €6 million to back them. And we would really hope to have that in place, if at all possible, before the local and European elections of June next year.
Deputy Lowry.
Taoiseach, I thank you for that very positive reply, because this is an issue that I and my colleagues in the regional group have been putting forward on behalf of our local radio stations across the country. And I think that this allocation of funding will enable them to sustain their service. It will allow them to retain experienced, high-quality staff and to recruit and train for the future. It will also allow them to further exploit the huge potential that they have. So their message to government and to every member of this House is that broadcasting is not all just about RTE. Just like RTE, independent radio is an asset that cannot be allowed to fail. And government policy, and I'm delighted that the Cabinet made those decisions today, because it will provide relief from the financial burden that they currently endure.
Thanks again, Deputy. And I know independent broadcasters and also Local Ireland have been briefing TDs and senators from all parties. Indeed, they met a delegation from my own parliamentary party to discuss the situation only in the past few weeks. We're very keen to press ahead with this new £6 million fund, the Local Democracy Reporting Fund and the Courts Reporting Fund, and that will be of particular benefit to local radio and also local newspapers which are struggling in the current environment, particularly when advertising revenues have fallen off and moved largely online. And as part of the wider reform of the TV licence fee, I think it's fair to say that any reform that's going to be meaningful has to be one that takes account of the fact that public service broadcasting isn't just provided by RTE. I think RTE does that very well, by the way, notwithstanding some of the issues that they've had in recent months, but also needs to take into account the fact that public service broadcasting is provided not just by RTE, but also by local radio, by local newspapers, and indeed the national independent media as well.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Danny Healy-Rae on behalf of the Rural Independent.
Thank you very much, Tom Corley. Taoiseach, the nitrates derogation reduction becomes a reality from the 31st of this month, and from 250 down to 220. And what it means is that we have to slaughter 40,000 heavily in calf cows this coming year, because there's no other market for them, and 160,000 in the next 4 years. Farmers will have reduced incomes, and smaller farmers will become unviable. Tim Healy from Inches and Rathmore has 58 cows presently. He worked hard to bring them up to that figure. He tells me that his advisor tells him he'll have to reduce them down to 48 because he can't rent any more land or he can't buy any more land because it's too expensive. And it's the first time in history that the farmers of Ireland are compelled to cull their cows. And if we do reduce production, it doesn't follow that consumers will reduce consumption, unless he can organise a hunger strike worldwide. But they will have to get the food somewhere else. And it doesn't matter to you whether it's from Brazil or Argentina or New Zealand. He don't mind once he'll get ear figures down here. But we're all under the same sky. Surely if we're talking about the climate and carbon emissions, that it should matter if the other crowd are increasing and creating more emissions. Have you ever heard of such a thing as sequestration? You're telling the farmers of Ireland that you can't measure sequestration of carbon until 2027 or later. Yeah. But at the same time, you're hell-bent in reducing the cow numbers this year because Eamon Ryan wants it to do. Yeah. And you're under his apron, and for yourself and Micheál Martin to stay in power and the rest of you, he'll sell the farmers of Ireland. Do you know what's happening in the rest of the world? The USA, I happened to go over there for a funeral last week for a couple of days. The biggest of vehicles, there's roads under, there's roads over, there's roads up and down beside it with 6 lanes on every side. The biggest of vehicles, all petrol, 8-litre petrol. Germany are going mining new coal mines. China building hundreds of coal burning power stations. And I certainly know that we don't have to have AdBlue in India. If you're talking about water quality, and surely that's what this is about, but why aren't you so interested in doing something about the hundreds of treatment plants and settlements around the county of Kerry and even around the country that have no treatment plant? They're polluting the water. And just one other thing, Taoiseach. If all of us are evaporated out of this country tonight, to only make 0.13 of 1% of a difference worldwide. And this is what he put in the people, the torture that he put in the people through. For the sake of Healy-Rae and for staying in power and for no other bloody reason, but that's what he's at. And drive the farmers and the people of Ireland down to the ground. That's what you think of him.
Thank you. Taoiseach, please.
Thanks, Deputy. I think it's important to put on the record of the House that the Nitrates Directive and derogation is an environment law, and it's about water quality above all. And no matter what they do in America or India or China, and no matter what Eamon Ryan thinks or doesn't, I would have thought all of us in this House want to have high quality waterways, rivers in our country. So it's in all our interests, urban, rural, farmers, non-farmers, to have pristine and clean rivers and clean water in our country. And ultimately that's what the Nitrates Directive and derogation is about. It's not about CO2 emissions or climate. It is about water quality. I'm disappointed that we weren't able to hold on to the 250. We did our best to do so. The Commissioner, Minister McConalogue, and I met the Commissioner, explored any possible flexibilities that we could get, including moving the date for implementation. But the rules are clear, and they're there written down in black and white in European law. We do have some flexibilities. The average is not immediate from the 1st of January. It's over the period of the year, so people can delay implementation. But obviously that means doing more in the latter half of the year and the consequences that arise from that. But it doesn't have to happen on January the 1st. It's the average over the full year. There's the possibility of exporting slurry. There are other options available to farmers too. And as well as that, there's some changes to how calves are calculated in the directive and help for farmers announced in the budget in terms of slurry storage and so on. But my biggest concern, Deputy, and this is a concern that I have for Irish farmers and our food industry, is the possibility that we will lose the derogation altogether in 2025. The Netherlands has already lost it. It's already gone in Flanders. It's just Ireland and Denmark that continue to have this derogation. And I have a big concern that we'll lose it altogether. And if we lose it, we'll be doing a big disservice to Irish farmers, to farm incomes, and to our wider food industry. And the worst thing we can do now for farmers is to tell them that this problem is going to go away, because it's not. We have to work together to improve our water quality. And that means changes being made on farms. It also means improving Irish waters, infrastructure, and doing lots of other things. But the last thing we can do now is to turn a blind eye or tell people this problem is going to go away. It isn't. The way we keep the derogation that we have is to improve our water quality, and that means government and farmers working together to make sure that happens.
Healy-Rae.
It's very clear. The critical point here is if we don't sell the food from Ireland, that we'll get it elsewhere. And it's very clear to me that neither you or Micheál Martin or Charlie McConalogue put up any real fight to stop this. Because if they don't get, consumers will have to get the food. And we have 1 million more people in Ireland. And I hope you're not thinking of slaughtering some of them, even though I wouldn't trust you if Eamon Ryan asked you to do it. But the cow is the easy option. And what about the treatment plants? You're making no attempt in the world. This is going on since I came up here in 2016. I and others in the House have been raised it. There's no difference, no improvement. Kinmare is waiting. Corran, Scotland don't have any. Castleoyne is waiting for the next extension. It is all over the county. Knocknagoshel, Broston, we don't have the treatment plants. And the waters are being polluted. What's the difference in polluting the water from bad treatment plants? And if you're saying that the cattle are doing it, and I doubt it very much, but the farmers are the first target, and that's why, at the present time, Taoiseach, there's so many young farmers not going to take over because they can't bear the villainisation that farmers are getting and the criticism they're getting. They're being blamed for the whole thing. And yet we see what's happening in the rest of the world. No one else is doing what you're doing.
Please.
But because Eamon Ryan flies out in a cop to cop or whatever. He'd want to get a bottle of cop on somewhere because the racket is going on. I mean, and to give 2 weeks over in Dubai, where they don't give one tuppence about it because they'll drill oil and they'll shove the land out into the sea and they'll build cities. And we can't build a house here, a local fella can't get penny for to put a roof over his head. That's what we have here.
You're on a roll.
I don't like anyone being demonised when it comes to this debate. I don't like to see farmers being demonised, and I don't like to see farmers being climate shamed, and I don't like to see my colleague, the Minister for the Environment, Minister Ryan, being demonised either. This is a European law agreed by 27 member states, and it's been around for quite some time, long before Eamon Ryan was a member of this government. And I believe it's possible to produce high quality food in this country and still have good water quality. That's actually what people in Ireland want in rural and in urban communities. And if we get the reputation for producing food in a way that is not sustainable, we will lose market share around the world. 90% of the food we produce is for export. And we need to maintain that reputation of having sustainable agriculture and being genuine about the Origin Green concept. So it's in everyone's interest to get this right. Farmers want to keep the derogation, we want to keep our market share around the world, and we also want to improve our water quality. And that means government and farmers working together to make sure that happens between now and 2025. Yes, it involves investment in treatment plants. It also involves reducing industrial waste, and it involves changes on farm. And if we do that, we will keep the derogation. But bear this in mind, to keep the derogation, it's a vote of 27 member states, most of whom don't have the derogation and see it as a competitive advantage that we have. So we need to be clever about this. And it doesn't involve slagging off Eamon Ryan. It means boxing clever, actually looking after the interests of farmers. And that means improving our water quality so we can keep the derogation.
Thank you very much. Please, Deputy. Please. No.